Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Stephen Ehrlich, the director of Forbes Digital Assets. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary. Pleasure to be here.
For sure. So, Steve, Grayscale beat the SEC. The SEC now has to consider Grayscale's plan to turn its Grayscale Bitcoin Trust into an ETF, which it initially rejected. What does all this mean?
Right. So this was a pretty substantial, significant decision that went very much in Grayscale's favor, and sort of threw out many of the arguments that the SEC has been putting forward in the dozens of ETF rejections that it has made in the last few years. So let's kind of unpack that. I mean, first, what is an ETF? ETF stands for Exchange Traded Fund. In many ways, it's kind of the white whale of crypto at this point. The idea of a spot Bitcoin ETF, where people can get exposure to Bitcoin without actually having to go through the hassle of setting up a wallet and going to a Coinbase or Binance or wherever, and dealing with all the issues of connecting a bank account, so on and so forth. An ETF is basically just a financial product, like a security that anybody can purchase, from a self-directed brokerage account to just like regular financial advisors or brokers can purchase for you. It's a clean, simple, relatively cheap, efficient, regulated way to buy exposure to many different assets. And many people listening probably own dozens or hundreds of ETFs. They're all over the place, for things like commodities like gold, to just bundling together a bunch of different securities, stocks. Like there's ETFs that track the S&P 500 or NASDAQ, and so on and so forth. The SEC, however, has been very hesitant. I mean, some would almost call hostile. Some would even say hostile to the idea of a Bitcoin ETF. And the reason for that is that they claim that the underlying market, the Bitcoin spot market, is prone to fraud and manipulation. Now, Rosemary, I mean, we've covered the space long enough to know that there are plenty of bad actors in the crypto space. I mean, there's hacks. I mean, one of our reporters, Javier Paz, published a story last year claiming that virtually half of all Bitcoin transactions trades are fake. So there's a lot there's a lot to digest there, and clearly the Bitcoin market, just like any other financial market, can always get better at regulating itself, policing itself. However, the real sort of like the real contrary argument to what the SEC was saying is that back in November 2021, they approved multiple Bitcoin futures ETFs to start trading on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange (CME). Futures A futures ETF basically tracks the price of Bitcoin futures contracts. Futures are essentially a sort of a forward contract where two parties engage in a transaction where one promises to deliver something on a particular date in the future, then the other person will pay a certain amount. And it led to a lot of claims of hypocrisy among crypto that the SEC would approve these futures ETFs, but not a spot ETF, given how closely aligned futures prices are to spot, and sort of like the symbiotic relationship between the two. And Grayscale, which is kind of seen as the Hotel California of crypto. It's the Grayscale Investments is the world's largest digital asset manager. Its flagship product, Grayscale Bitcoin Trust (GBTC), is the um, product, biggest exchange traded product in crypto. Right now, it has about $16 billion of Bitcoin, and Grayscale had been trying to convert that into an ETF. As you mentioned, the SEC rejected it. Grayscale cried foul. They sued the SEC in court, and then on Monday, the court sided in very strong terms with Grayscale.
Well, so how does this affect the overall crypto market? I saw a few weeks ago it went down. What's
Mhm.
going on?
Right. So the crypto market has kind of been sluggish for the last few months. I mean, really straddling the 29,000 to $30,000 mark. There was a bit of I guess you could call it a flash crash, I guess about a week and a half ago, where the price dropped to around $25,000 for really no apparent reason. There wasn't some big piece of news that led to the drop, but I think just general malaise among investors, coupled with declining trading volumes, declining liquidity, which, as you know, can sort of accentuate price movements one way or another. And when the price is going down, it can go down faster. We saw more liquidations from leverage traders that borrowed funds to put on long positions. So all that was kind of going on because we're in this sort of quiet period of crypto. And it's worth pointing out that August and September historically are very bearish months for Bitcoin. Then this news came out, and it led to a bit of a price jump. I mean, GBTC actually went up about 17%. The discount for GBTC, which basically means how much the price of GBTC, which actually does trade on some OTC markets, trades under its NAV, shrank from about 29% to 17%. And then we saw surges in the price of Bitcoin, crypto stocks like Coinbase, MicroStrategy, Bitcoin mining stocks. They all kind of went up. However, that rally was relatively short-lived, and they've started giving back about half those gains at this point. And I think that speaks to a couple of key points. I mean, for one, it's very important to point out that the core siding with Grayscale does not mean that there is now a Bitcoin spot ETF. It just means that throughout the SEC's rejection of this particular ETF application, and it forces the SEC to go back and reconsider Grayscale's application, and they either have to find a different rationale for rejecting it, they have to approve it, or if they're going to use the same rationale, they have to provide better evidence. And the SEC has, I believe, 45 days to appeal this decision, so it's not final. So there's still a lot that has to be worked out. And then, so my sense is that, and Grayscale is not the only application out there. I mean, famously, there's ones from BlackRock and Fidelity, Invesco, VanEck, and a very who's who of blue chip investment firms, and they're all sort of trying to be first in line. But realistically, I don't anticipate, although I think it's likely we are going to finally see a Bitcoin ETF, I don't anticipate one actually starting to trade until next year. So we still have some time to wait. And as traders slowly kind of came to that realization, coupled with these sort of bearish trends in the market, Bitcoin, other assets started giving back some of those gains. And I would anticipate that trend to continue for the next couple of months, absent some sort of big stimulus that pushes the market in one direction or another.
Mm-hmm. So do you think this whole situation is evidence that we may be coming out of a crypto regulatory winter?
It's possible. I mean, one of the big trends that has been going, that's sort of been circulating in the air supply, especially on crypto Twitter and elsewhere, is just the fact that the SEC seems to be running into a little bit of a buzzsaw when it comes to federal courts. I mean, there's this judgment a few weeks ago. I guess it was probably in the middle of June. Another federal judge sort of split the baby in the sense that the SEC had been involved in a very long-running suit against Ripple, a company that sells a lot of XRP. The SEC claims it's an issuer in its securities parlance of XRP, one of the largest cryptocurrencies in the world. And the judge said that certain sales of XRP were securities and some were not. And that was kind of seen as a rejection of some of what the SEC is doing. So there is a general idea, although it is worth pointing out that a different federal judge sided with the SEC's rationale on all of this. So sometimes judges, obviously, they all have their own minds and they can come to different decisions. And maybe all of this will have to eventually get to the Supreme Court, absent bills in Congress that sort of finally sort of set the rules of the road. But I think it does show that the SEC maybe has been a bit overzealous in certain ways, particularly the Bitcoin spot ETF, because again, the claims of hypocrisy, I do think to some degree, I can understand where people are coming from that point of view. And then Hester Peirce, an SEC commissioner that is famously dovish towards crypto, has time and time again dissented from SEC ETF projections, basically saying that Bitcoin ETFs are being held to a higher standard and that it's not the SEC's job to determine whether or not something is a good investment or a bad investment, but that people should be allowed to choose what they want to do. And so we'll see what all that comes out. But I think if we're going to see a big regulatory change, it's going to have to come through Congress, where fortunately it does appear that there's several bills focused on broader market structure as well as more esoteric topics such as stablecoins that are getting some momentum.
Well, Steve, when should we expect a decision from the SEC regarding Grayscale's ETF?
Right. So they have, I think, 45 days or so to decide whether or not they're going to appeal. From what I have heard, if they do appeal, then that's a whole separate process. If they don't appeal, then the court, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals is going to issue more concrete guidance on what happens next. Michael Sonnenschein, the Grayscale CEO, has said that he's not entirely sure what happens next. He doesn't know if, like the SEC might just reconsider the application, if Grayscale is going to have to reapply. It's kind of hard to tell. This is very much uncharted territory. Something else worth keeping in mind too is that again, the Grayscale GBTC ETF application is not the only one out there. There's ones from Invesco and BlackRock and ARK Invest from Kathy Wood's shop that also are trying to get to the front of the line here. And in the next couple of days, actually, over this holiday weekend, we're going to be coming up to the first deadline where the SEC is going to have to decide whether or not to approve the ETF, deny the ETF, or push it back out another 30, 60, or 90 days to give it more time to make a decision. Ultimately, once an ETF application gets accepted by the SEC as complete and full, that starts the clock, and they really have up to 240 days to finally make a decision whether or not something will be allowed to trade or not. So that's why I say that there might be some short-term deadlines, but we really may not see something begin trading until next year because there's a good chance, I think, that the SEC will let that 240-day period run its full course.
So do you think traders should be following this decision, and if so, why?
Traders should absolutely be following this decision because, I mean, for one, it sort of gave the markets a jolt. It led to a lot of action, particularly when it comes to the price of GBTC, and then plenty of other crypto adjacent stocks, equities, and other assets. And there certainly are opportunities for traders that might want to get in on that action. I mean, for instance, now that Grayscale won this suit, there could be the GBTC is still trading at about a 17% discount. The reason that occurs, and it can't be arbitraged away like it can in a typical ETF, is because GBTC or Grayscale is not allowed, at least according to their own interpretation of the law, to facilitate redemptions, and that means that like people can't hand back in their shares of GBTC and say, "Give me my Bitcoin back." If that was possible, then all of a sudden the discount will go away because any trader, any arbitrager would buy as much GBTC as they possibly can at the market, exchange it for the Bitcoin, and make a 17% premium. That's not happening right now. But of course, if it becomes an ETF, that is possible. And if a trader says, you know what, I think that there's a high likelihood of this happening, of GBTC becoming an ETF, well, that discount's eventually going to go away. That's just the way ETFs work. So that's an opportunity there. I mean, that's just one particular way, but I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of folks looking at ways to short assets or maybe take on more leverage particular assets, just depending on their own particular outlook for the markets. But whenever there's volatility, whenever there's some excitement, there's plenty of opportunities for traders to get involved. But again, from a longer term investor perspective that doesn't actively manage their portfolio, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that while this is seen as an exciting and potentially bullish step for a Bitcoin ETF and just Bitcoin enthusiasts overall, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to happen tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Steve.
All right. Thanks, Rosemary.